when we talk about the base and this and that, all that stuff matters when it comes to elections. This is it for him. He's got 4 years, he's out. He doesn't have to kiss ass. He doesn't have to do any of that stuff. He doesn't have to listen to the base. And to be honest with you, the base is in love with him. If he supports it, then they notice when he came out and said he supported it, everyone shut up. The conversation ended. So that he doesn't listen to his base, they listen to him.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. As you know, this is a place where we examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain what is most factual and logically consistent. So today I want to be talking about something that has to do with what has been happening of recent, especially as regards to the MAGA movement and Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and the tech bros. Something that has to do with immigration and H1B visas. And to help me understand what is going on, I have with me Adam B. Coleman, who is an author and a publisher and the founder of Wrong Speak Publishing, who has a book from Black Victim to Black Victor, and also has a new book coming up, The Children Left Behind. So, Adam B. Coleman, welcome to the conversation. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Very well. It's good to have you back. So, to just quickly ask, what's your new book about? Just give us a few minutes. What's your new book about?
It's a cultural critique on what I see to be probably the biggest issue facing the West, which is family separation. I think it's the root cause of many of the other issues that we discuss, whether it be drug addiction, homelessness, prostitution, general degeneracy that people like to complain about. But often the root of it has to do with either family separation, some form of neglect, or just children coming from tumultuous homes. So within the book, I use my childhood as an example. So it's not quite a memoir, but there are a lot of stories so people can kind of understand child perspective. It's a non-political, non-racial, child-centered book. So anyone who reads it will see the not just the what happened to me, but how I thought as a child and what I experienced, and even leading into adulthood, some of the struggles. So there's a lot of tough topics to talk about, and I do talk about my faith. I basically give my testimony within the book as well. It makes sense in the context when you do go and read it. It makes sense in the greater context of what I'm talking about. But yeah, there's some tough things, and if I did it right, people will read it and take something from it. If someone has a similar background as me, maybe they can gain some sort of hope from it. If you're a parent, you can take something from it and just say, I didn't think about how my actions affect our kids when it comes to this particular decision. So yeah, it's a very deep and I would say heavier book than Black Victim and Black Victor. It's way more personal.
Mm, yeah, it sounds that it's going to be an interesting read. So, thank you so much for that. I'm hoping the book comes out soon and people are able to get it. So, my next question, which is not really related to the topic of today, but which I need to get out of the way, it was initially what I wanted to talk to you about, but so much time has passed. But I still need to ask. After the election, there was a lot of theories around how black men made Kamala Harris lose the election. So, I want to ask, how important were black men to the outcome of the election in 2024?
Um, it's a good question. I can't remember the numbers offhand. I know that it was more than what Trump got last time around, and obviously it was bigger. It was a bigger turnout as far as Black people in general towards Trump this time around. But I don't remember it being massive. But here's the thing that people have to remember: there's an entitlement issue when it comes to Democrats and Black Americans. So if it's a 2% difference, they're like, "What's going on with Black people?" They just freak the hell out. So I guess it just depends on what perspective you're coming from. If you're like me and you're like, all right, it's a shift for a demographic that doesn't often shift. So maybe that means something, or maybe it's just Trump. Maybe it was just that Kamala was the bad candidate. Like, I think there needs to be more of a trend. Maybe the next election cycle, or maybe the next couple election cycles, that would really give us an idea if people, not just Black Americans, but just in general, if people are truly straying away from the Democratic Party, or are they exercising their independence and just choosing the least worst option. So
Mm.
it's a difficult question to answer because I think it's multifaceted. But I do think that if I was to just kind of like, if I was to read the room a little bit, I've met way more people who are Black. And I've actually, there was a study or a little bit of survey that I was conducting that was supposed to get published, but it didn't work out, where people are more vocal, who are Black, more vocal to show their disdain or disappointment for Democrats or a Democrat candidate than I've ever seen before, and openly stating so. So even if they weren't supporting Trump, there's a bit of, I would say, like political homelessness that's being experienced for many Black Americans, where they're not fully on board when it comes to the Republicans or maybe Trump or something of that nature. There's something that hasn't completely sold them on that, but they also feel like the Democrats aren't doing anything for them either. So I think
Mm.
that there's a growth in independence, and I think sometimes people presume that if you vote for one particular party, that you're just in love with that party. And many
Mm.
people vote because of pragmatism. So if all you know is the Democrat Party and the Democrat Party is the only one reaching out, even if they're not really doing much for you, but you're not being sold by the other side, you are actually open to it, then you might just keep voting for the Democrats. Or if you live in an
Mm.
area that only has Democrats who are running for your seat, then the choice becomes clear as far as which party. And then it's a matter of, are you voting for the socialist or are you voting for the moderate Democrat? Like,
Mm.
it's far more complicated than I think a lot of people on the right think it is.
Mm. Mm. Now, let's dive right into the meat of the conversation.
Mhm.
What's the H1B visa? Can you just give a? I know you were in tech, right? And this a lot of this conversation has to do with what's happening in the tech industry. So can you
Yeah.
give kind of a little background on what the H1B visa system is?
I'm not super proficient when it comes to it, but I have a general understanding as far as the H1B visa. So if I say something wrong or whatever I say, fact check me. But from my understanding, the H1B visa process, it's a way for U.S. employers to bring people coming from other countries into United States purely for employment. I do think in certain circumstances that it could lead to them getting like a permanent residency and stuff like that. So it could be a track. And a lot of tech companies, for the longest time, this is nothing new. H-1B visas have been around for a long time. It could be some sort of track for that person to stay within the country after that. But a lot of tech companies utilize it, especially for Indians, bringing them coming over from India to do tech work, because there is a decent tech sector in India as far as education goes. They're able to bring them over here, and maybe in some cases they pay them a little bit less, or maybe they pay them about the same amount. I don't know. Sometimes, and I think this is the part that people lose understanding. There are instances where certain industries don't have enough people who fit the criteria to work in that industry. That's not for everything. Obviously, there are people who put out H-1B requests, and sometimes the requests are just a process. It's not like, oh, someone from another country is definitely going to fulfill it, but they're just putting it out there just like they would on Career Builder or any other employment website. So there was a little bit of discovery that people were like, oh, I realized I can go to a website and look up who puts up job requests on here. It's like,
Mm.
that doesn't necessarily mean anything. It doesn't mean they're actually utilizing it. Yeah, that's a whole other thing. But to basically summarize, It's just a visa process to bring over qualified applicants for whatever job that's being posted. And it's a legal pathway to bring them over into United States to work.
So something striking about what you said was that at times there are not enough qualified people in a particular, maybe in a particular field, to feel
Mhm.
that the US needs to look outside. And this is an argument that Musk and Vivek they've been using to justify this program. On the flip side, you said there are some people who just put out this request, it necessarily doesn't get fulfilled. Now,
Right,
there are two competing things. One is what Musk has said. The other is MAGA's claim that this is a process used to shortchange American workers, and that they're bringing in these workers. For example, it was found out that Musk fired thousands of workers in some of his factories and replaced them with H1B visas. So it does seem like there is a trend to try and get cheaper labor from overseas and replace
right.
American workers with those cheaper labor, because essentially those guys are tied to the job. So they would do things that Americans would not do. They work under conditions American would not work under. So is this one of the situations where it happens but not so much, so it's not a big deal, like it's not like it doesn't happen, it does happen but not so much? Or is this a situation where MAGA is actually right? No, this is a big problem that is affecting thousands of American workers as they are claiming. So in this situation, where does this tilt more to? Does this tilt more to what Musk and Vivek are saying, or does this tilt more to what MAGA is claiming?
That's a very good question. I think that it can be abused, just like any other process can be abused. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is being abused by every single employer who's trying to use it. This weird area. We like to throw around the word if someone's qualified. In the DEI conversation. Well, what is qualified to you is not the same thing as qualified to me. Sometimes qualification isn't about which school you went to. Sometimes it's about your competency. Do you fit into this environment? Are you nice? Like these aren't things that you put on a resume, right? These are things that you would find out in some sort of interview. Do you fit into the work corporate culture of this particular environment? So when it comes to finding good people who fit a particular job, like that, it's all subjective. It's highly subjective. Do I believe that in certain circumstances that someone coming from another country is coming here and fulfilling a job that could have had a better person fill it who is an American? Maybe, but once again, that's all subjective. Maybe someone does. Maybe in a let's use programmers. Maybe there's a strong demand for AI programmers, and there's a whole ton of them in India, but there's not as many in the United States. And then you start hiring Indian workers. Now, if you have a quarter of your workforce is Indian, or maybe half of your workforce is Indian, wouldn't you want to hire more people who kind of fit into that workforce culture? Culture, like it's not. To me, it doesn't seem like a stretch that they want to continue to go down that path. And that's when you have certain tech firms that look the way they do, and they have a lot of people who are foreign born. So it really just depends. I think the biggest problem is that within this culture war, everything becomes a nail, and they're running around with a hammer, right? There is usefulness. I've known multiple people who've come here, and they tend to be in like where I live at. There's a lot of Indian people who live over here. Many of them have come here on H1B visas. Nicest people I could deal with, and they're very smart and they're hardworking, and they make a lot of money. And so, do I know if there's for certain that there's someone who applied for the same job who can do something? But I don't know. Like, I think people presume that there definitely is, while at the same time, we'll talk about how our kids are not being properly educated. Our kids are dumber. They go to colleges and they're becoming woke, and they're getting these BS degrees. So which one is it? Do we just have this massive pool of highly educated kids who can't get a job, or are they not being educated? or is it somewhere in between? But I think a lot of Americans have this old ideal that they're not putting the math equation together. There clearly is an issue in our education system. We could look at all the world rankings as far as math, literacy, and all that stuff. The United States is not in the top 5 for most of these categories. There is a competency issue, there's an education issue, there's an education gap. And so if you're telling me that, man, there's just a ton of kids out there who are ready to rock and roll as programmers, who know how to do math without whipping out a calculator, like like it's just, I'm not sure 100%. So if I'm an employer, I think I would put it like this. I trust more of the private sector than I do the public sector. And I think that the private sector is often going to go for something that is not just the cheapest labor, which a lot of people think that it's all about cheapest labor. Because if you hire the wrong person, it becomes expensive. And if you hire too cheap of labor, it becomes really expensive. So they're going to hire the cheapest competent labor workforce that they can in tech fields. And so if they're finding a lot of success hiring certain types of people coming from other countries like India, then that's what they're going to continue to do. And I mean, I can only speak anecdotally. I haven't met a dumb Indian person who came from another country that I worked alongside. They were all relatively smart. They could do the job. If there was any sort of weakness on their part, it might have been socially, but that's because they're not from America. So like, it's a learning curve. Just like if I was to go to another country, socially, I might struggle too. So, it just really depends. But I don't know if I'm completely answering your question, because I don't think
Yeah,
there's just
yeah,
one right answer. I don't think
yeah.
MAGA is 100% right.
Yeah, I think you're answering the question, and it's in a way that's productive. Now,
Yeah.
when this whole conversation started, it drew my mind to this idea of meritocracy, right?
Hmm.
The idea that America is a meritocracy, and this sort of just pokes some hole in that idea, or that it's the best man for the job that always gets the job. That's the narrative that has always been put out there. America is a meritocracy. So if you're not getting the job, maybe you're not smart enough, you're not working hard enough. So work harder, be smarter, or it's
Hmm.
an IQ thing. Now, MAGA is finding out that when you talk about criteria for employing someone, it's not as straightforward as just being the best in the job. There's so many other factors that come into play.
Right.
There are so many other factors. You mentioned something about employing the the least expensive competent option, and that's always been my idea. My idea is that, you know what, the best person for the job literally doesn't always get the job, but
Right.
someone who is competent enough to do the job usually gets the job. So if you see someone like, say, Kamala Harris, for example, and Donald Trump or any other Republican candidate, although so well, she's not the absolute best. She's not the best that the Democrats could have found. But ask yourself the question: is she competent enough to do the job? That's basically what most businesses do. No business is going to be sitting around waiting for the most competent person, because that's a something you can't actually find. So this just
Right.
puts a hole in that whole argument. Meritocracy isn't really the best. It's about finding who is someone who is competent enough at a price that the company can afford to pay. And that's what we're seeing now. Now, the other point I wanted to just quickly pivot to is you're a former Democrat, right? And
Hmm.
I suppose you're a Republican now. So what's
No,
MAGA's deal? Oh, you're not. You're not
I'm an
Republican
independent.
or independent. Okay.
Yep.
But I think you can have an idea on this. What's
Mhm.
MAGA's and the Republicans' deal with immigration? Prior to the election, they were rallying against illegal immigration, but it does seem now that they are totally against immigration in total. So what's going on there?
So one thing that we should try to establish is that MAGA, I mean, and this is a good thing, and this is just with any movement. MAGA is not one thing. What, especially if in the online world, we're seeing factions. There are different factions of the political right that are running around, and some of them calling them woke right or whatever you want to call them. But what is happening is in this culture war, they've taken the position of going after everything in our culture, even things that don't make sense as to why are you going after it. It's not even a priority. And that's why I wonder if the whole H1B visa thing, is it a massive issue? Is it really stopping Americans from getting that particular job? And I don't know about that. And I think people are presuming that's the case, that this is this massive problem. But you're correct. There is this the conversation, the right conversation was about legal legal pathways into this country, all for legal immigration, right? If there's a process, then so be it. Now we're to the point of questioning the process, which it could be a good thing to question H1B visas. I don't know. But my problem that I see is the people who are asking the questions know dick about the H1B visas, right? Just like I'm not going to sit here and argue for or against it because I don't know it to the nth degree, which is why I thought it was very fascinating that people were shocked and awe when Vivek said exactly what everyone has been saying for the past 4 years. There's an issue with in American culture as far as education goes. There's a gap in education in America. These aren't controversial things. We've literally been complaining about our public schools are failing our kids. And then Vivek came in and said the same thing. How could he say that? He's saying, hey, America's a great place, but how about we study more and stop, and watch TV less, right? These are the things that change the trajectory for a lot of kids. So when you ask the question, how come immigrant kids do better than native born kids? In many cases, this is why. And, so I do think that I thought the reaction to him saying, honestly, the most common sense thing in kind of a benign statement of this, let's just be truthful. This is why, like, we know this. And I haven't been able to to wrap my head completely around why there was such a strong reaction to the very thing that everyone has been complaining about at least since 2020. That there's an issue in our public schools, that the teachers are doing this, that the professors are biased, that the schools are charging them too much and they're not teaching them enough, that our colleges, there's too many colleges that don't teach anything. They give out these BS degrees. The kids come out, they don't know anything. And Vivek is saying the same thing, essentially, that our kids, whereas before you could go to college and it meant something, right? It meant something because there weren't that many colleges to go to. To get a degree was a big deal. Now anybody can go to college. So the value of an education, a college education, it's not as strong as it was decades ago. And so what's going to happen? Do you think I'm getting the same education as a Harvard student as someone who goes online to some random school you've never heard of before? No, I don't think so. Do we think that every professor is the same in quality? Of course not. Like that'd be asinine to say that. So I don't understand why people had such a visceral reaction to Vivek, who's an American citizen, was born in this country, questioning American culture, when all we've been doing is questioning American culture.
So, so I think multiple things are happening here. The first one is, crass ignorance, like you mentioned, that those who are most vocal about this know shit about it.
Right.
The other one is an interplay of racism, bigotry, and whatever you want to call it, right? I know it's not cool to invoke race in conversations like this, but the facts are the facts. Facts don't actually care about your feelings, right? What this has revealed is that there is a preference for a certain type of American. And also the fact that when Americans were critiquing American culture, they didn't have quote and unquote white people in mind when they were saying schools were bad, these people are not getting an education. Now that Vivek has said that, it's almost like Vivek saying this to white America. This is a problem. Of what? It's no, it's been very fashionable and it's been very cool to talk about the problems in the black community in terms of crime, in terms of single motherhood, and so many other things. It's uncontestable. If Vivek had said that specifically about Black America, I will tell you there would have been no uproar. But Musk and Vivek are essentially telling MAGA, aka white people, that you're uneducated, right? And they see this as an insult. Even though they've been saying the same things in a roundabout way, they've been saying, oh, these woke colleges. What did they think was happening in woke colleges that only liberal students were going to these woke colleges? So if these colleges weren't teaching anything, of course they're not teaching all American students. They're not going to
Right.
discriminate and say, let's teach the conservative kids, let's teach them the right thing, impart the correct knowledge, and teach the liberal kids something else. No, it's affecting everybody. So they are being surprised is surprising, which brings, and there've been some comments about Vivek being Indian and all that. This dude is American, so why does it matter that his parents came from India? So there's this interplay of all these things. Now, on the other hand, I don't think American culture is as bad as it's been made to be. I don't think
No.
American educational system is as bad as it's been made to be. In fact, I would rather prefer it to whatever the hell is happening in Asia that's just churning out robots. For see, life isn't always about science. If you go to South Korea, if you read about South Korea, you would see what the hyper competitive educational system does to students. They are stressed. They can't even reproduce. South Korea's population is failing, right? There's a high level of suicide when the results from exams come out. So do you want that kind of dystopia to be replicated in America? America has its own dystopia in the first place. So I think a functional society should allow for people to be able to do many things. Not
Right.
everybody is going to go into STEM. America is 300 million people. Not everybody is going to go into science. Not everybody is going to go into medicine and law. I think that there are enough people to do those things. So hyper fixating on a culture that encourages, STEM and science, I think it's a dumb thing to do. It was a dumb
Yeah.
thing for Vivek and Musk to even say that. Of course, there are challenges with the system, but making it this way, nah, I didn't really see the utility in what they were saying.
Yeah. You're right as far as in America, the online world makes it seem like nothing works, everything is terrible. And more often than not, these are people who've never left our country to see what a place looks like that doesn't work and has all types of issues. And you're right. I don't want robot kids in school. I want them to get an education but enjoy being children. And I think most Americans like that viewpoint. There's a balance. I think what Vivek was advocating for was a balance. But even more so, Vivek was pointing out if and this is the part where people read something that they wanted to read. Vivek was talking about in the most competitive markets, in the highest earning brackets, in the most competitive schools. This is what the kids do. So if you want that, these are the things that you have to do. He's not saying that watching TV is bad and give this up and live a life as a hermit who just reads books and takes tests. Like he wasn't saying that. He was making the point because the point was talking about high earning tech jobs. That's the whole conversation was about H1B visas and high earning tech jobs. He was saying to reach that, which is a high ask, you would have to do these things at a very early age, and it takes a lot of sacrifice. And he's speaking from experience. So this is the truth, and I think any American who is honest knows what these kids go through. The kids who always raise their hands in class, who get A pluses because they go home and do all their homework. They study all the time. Like there's a regimen that they have, right? And they take it very seriously. they get into the best schools and the best colleges, and they're challenged more than other kids are challenged. So like these are real steps to reach that pinnacle level. And so he's saying that it starts early, which makes sense.
Yeah, I think, in conversations like this, of course, everyone has sort of a point, right? But what is totally missing in the conversation is the potential for exploitation that may happen to these H1B visas. I mean, MAGA, they're talking more about how it's making American workers lose jobs or lose opportunities. On the other hand, the employer might be thinking of how it can help them save costs, but no one is talking about the actual issue damage that it does to some workers who may be tied to contracts that are so terrible, but they don't have a choice because, relatively speaking, it's a better paying job than where they're coming from. And this
Right.
brings me to Donald Trump in 2016, who actually came out against the H1B visa program, saying it was an exploitative process and so on and so forth. He seemed to understand the bad side of it, right? And he said, well, he uses it because he's a businessman, but no one should have to use a system like that. But now he's pivoted to saying that he actually supports the H1B visa program. And so far, he's taken the side of Musk and Vivek. Now, if there's anything I know about Donald Trump is when he says something and his base revolts, he very quickly reverses course. But this time, it doesn't seem to be doing that. It seems to be sticking to his guns, seems to be sticking with Vivek and Musk. So, what's going on there? What's going on with Trump? Is Musk that influential? Is Musk having an undue influence over Trump enough for him to actually ignore his base at this point in time?
Well, this is a topic that's interesting because when we talk about the base and this and that, all that stuff matters when it comes to elections. This is it for him. He's got 4 years, he's out. He doesn't have to kiss ass. He doesn't have to do any of that stuff. He doesn't have to listen to the base. And to be honest with you, the base is in love with him. If he supports it, then they notice when he came out and said he supported it, everyone shut up. The conversation ended. So that he doesn't listen to his base, they listen to him more often than not. And so that and that's a bit of a different scenario as to why. But I think he recognizes that just like with anything else, there can be reforms. I think my biggest issue is when people say, well, this is doing a couple of bad things, so we must get rid of the entire thing. It's like, well, no, you reform it, you fix it, right? Oh, well, this department, like how they talk about the FBI. The FBI did X, Y, and Z, so we should disband the FBI. Why do we have the FBI in the first place? And it's like, well, the FBI is kind of important. They do a lot of stuff that you don't realize that they're doing, and that actually does keep people safe. They investigate all different types of federal crimes and prevent things from happening. Now, do they entrap people sometimes? Yeah. Right. You can question if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's not all bad and it's not all filled with terrible people. I think just like in many organizations, it's a leadership issue, but the function of the FBI is not a bad thing. I've heard people talk about the ATF. Why does the ATF exist? I think that's more of a better argument as far as we don't really need the ATF because that function could be put into another organization. But those are like good things to kind of talk about and kind of debate. I don't know. But to kind of go back, I think Donald Trump, he doesn't really have to do anything that he doesn't want to do, to be honest with you. He doesn't have to worry about a re-election. He's not running anymore. He can quite literally do the things that he wants. At least as of right now, all three branches have gone Republican. So he can relatively streamline a lot of things. And he seems, if I can pivot a little bit, just to talk about specifically Trump, this Trump you can tell is serious. And the reason I say he's serious is because he's been very quiet. I think since the assassination attempt, he seems calmer and he seems very determined. It sounds like he's listening to his advisors, which wasn't happening before. He's not on social media to the same extent. He just seems like he's very much so a statesman, whereas before he didn't know. And I think he's admitted, like he's like, I'm in the White House. Like, oh, how do I manage this? What do I do? But I think this time around, he knows what he needs to do. He's been acting like the president for weeks now, right?
But I take the opposite position. I think this Trump is actually worse. I
Oh,
mean,
really?
yeah. The thing is, actions speak louder than words. So maybe because he isn't talking so much, that's why we think he's better now. But look at all his picks. Look at the people he's picked for various positions. In my opinion, I have issues with almost all of them, with RFK and Pete Hegseth and so on and so forth. This dude has been talking crazy. This time he's talking about invading Greenland. He wants to take Greenland by force. If Greenland doesn't want to sell, he's not ruling out military options. He wants to
I
sanction
haven't.
Canada.
He said military option
Yes,
Greenland. I didn't hear that.
yes.
I heard that he wanted to buy it.
He
I'm still
wants.
having questions as far as that. Like, why? What's the reason that we need to buy Greenland?
He wants to be Putin. I mean, he wants to do what Putin is doing. Now he's gone as far as saying Canada should become the of the US. And then he's talked about putting tariffs on Canada. It doesn't make any sense. Why are you starting a trade war with your very peaceful neighbor? I mean, Canada and the US enjoy a very special relationship. Why does he want to ruin that? So this Trump is even much more unhinged than the previous Trump. And maybe age has something to do with it, but he isn't any better. Maybe he's better now with the media. Maybe they are trying to really actually cut him off from saying so much things on the media. But the things that he does say are batshit crazy.
So one thing I started learning more about him. He does what is called the big ask. So his point, like, all right, give you an example. He said, all right, after he won, he went to Mexico and said, I'm going to put a massive tariff on you unless you do something about these people coming through the border, right? People were like, whoa, you can't do that. Like, we do a lot of trade with Mexico. And he gave a number, I can't remember what it was, like 100 or something percent tariff, right? That's the big ask, is to get their attention. You know what ended up happening? Mexico, all of a sudden, those caravans stopped. And he said, no more tariffs, right? So I think the way he is deciding to govern is vastly different than any other president because he's coming from a business perspective and he's seeing the United States somewhat as a business as far as United States is an asset. And this is my belief. My belief is the biggest problem when it comes to especially the federal government is that the people who work within the federal government in positions of leadership, who do diplomacy and all this other stuff, legislators who sign stuff away and write bills that gives money to other places and does all this stuff, opens up trade with adversarial countries. And they're doing this because they don't value America. It's someone else's money, right? That's literally how they operate. But if it was their money, they wouldn't be just giving away billions of dollars, but they don't operate in that particular fashion. Even beyond the money, I think there's an understanding that America has something that is relatively unique. We have a lot of intellectual property. We have a culture that supports innovation on its own without the government forcing it down our throat. And when the government tries to enforce innovation, things go wrong 90% of the time. But we have multiple assets in this country that should be protected. For example, if you were to go to China, do you think you could buy an American car? No. You go to you go to Japan. Japan is a big competing market. They don't really have American cars there. Why is that the case? Well, of course, they want to protect their market, right? So they don't just open up everything to them. And there are people who are trying to push for China to be able to bring their EV cars into the United States. Do we really want that? Because let me tell you, anybody who pays attention to Chinese news knows that their EV cars are horrible. They're bad in China.
But I sort of have a different opinion to this point that the point that you just you've been going on for the last few minutes.
Yeah,
So I don't think those who are negotiating on America's behalf don't have America's best interest at heart. I think actually they're doing it in America's best interest. You don't get to have this much influence and power in the world without spending money. That's just it.
well, yeah,
If America decides to be isolationist, okay, take for example, MAGA said they were going to cut down the federal budget by trillions of dollars, and then they started digging into some expenses. They saw 1 million for a program in Congo, 800,000 for, and they were mocking these programs. If you gather all those programs together, it literally does nothing to the budget if you remove it. But
yeah.
those little things buy some sort of goodwill for America. It's
I
American
agree.
dollar. Yeah, it's American dollar that keeps America at the forefront of the conversation, right? So far from being against the interest of America, it actually is in the interest of America for such things to be happening. And these guys in the policy departments, they understand this very well. Now, talking about EVs and okay, why are American vehicles not in the Chinese market? For one, I could why would you even want in the first place this protectionist whatever the hell is going on is anti-capitalist, is anti-free market in the first place, right? Number two, I don't think American vehicles would be competitive in China considering the exchange rate, considering the cost of production. That's why Chinese goods are even cheaper in America. So imagine, how are you going to buy an American car in China when you have that's so expensive? When you have a Chinese made vehicle that can almost do the same job, right? So I don't think it is really a function of China being so protectionist of its industry. That's why you are not having so many American cars in China. I just think there's the dynamics is a lot more complex than that. Of course, China can
Well,
be they can also have some protectionist policies as well. But in the interest of a free market, of which America always says, oh, we're the capitalist of free market. Tariffs and they're fundamentally anti-free markets. Protectionist policies are fundamentally anti-free market. So it just seems to be a
right.
lot of contradiction with these things.
Well, one, I'm not a free market capitalist in the sense that I recognize that if you mentioned the Congo, if all of a sudden the Congo sprung up and had a whole bunch of factories that produce goods that are 3 times cheaper to make and to ship over to the United States and bring it over here in a crucial market of ours, yeah, I don't want that to happen, right? Like I'm an American, just in the same way, Jamaica, for example, when Jamaica gained its independence, they took a lot of money from the IMF. Obviously had trouble paying back the IMF. The IMF said, okay, you can open up some of your markets and that will satisfy us. So what do? They open up their banana market. They can ship bananas from the Netherlands to Jamaica and sell it cheaper than making it inside Jamaica. Jamaica had a thriving banana market. Guess what happened to Jamaica's banana market? Right? So there's 100% reason why you should not be a free market capitalist. It is a dumb position in my opinion. If you have a strong industry within your particular country, you should be very selective as far as the competition you allow within your country. China is 1000% protectionist, right? They're not a free market capitalist society, and they don't pretend to be. At least I don't think they pretend to be. They like to be faux capitalists, but they're not free market. They're 100% protectionist. They do not want American tech to be within their country unless it fits a particular criteria. Same thing goes for the NBA. When they said we support Hong Kong, they pulled the plug on the NBA. Well, why would they do that? Oh, because they're protectionists, even ideologically. You cannot come into our country and say these things. Now, whether we agree with that or not is a different story, but that's their prerogative as a nation. And so they said, we will only allow these things. Elon has talked about having Teslas in China. Incredibly difficult to bring Teslas into China, right? They couldn't work in there. Mark Zuckerberg has talked about having Facebook in China and was recently complaining about how it's just incredibly difficult to do anything in China. Like these are normal complaints, but that's their prerogative as a nation. I'm not saying that America should be China, and we are not a free market capitalist society. We aren't. There are certain markets that we don't allow certain goods to come in from. However, my issue is that China is able to ship goods, and we can't even get into counterfeit goods. That's a massive problem too. But China is able to ship goods all the way from China into the United States for a cheap, discounted rate that they got from decades ago as a quote unquote developing nation. Why do they still have those favorable rates? Because now they're our competition. Why are we willingly letting our competition sell just about anything that they want within our markets? That seems kind of foolish. And so, yes, there should be some sort of balance. So I'm definitely not an isolationist. I think isolationism is stupid, and you're absolutely right that sometimes you got to pay to play, and sometimes you give some money to a country, you gain some favorability, and that's just what it is. And generally speaking, I'm fine with that. Our U.S. budget is primarily our defense budget, right? For all the wars and all these bases and all these different places. And it's just one big jobs program, and it just eats away at our federal government. That's really the monster that nobody wants to chew away at.
Exactly.
So
for me, all these points you've made, very, very fantastic. I think it's balanced and it's nuanced, but I just want to expand it a little bit. I think the problem I have with right wingers is they don't think through their ideas before being for it, before declaring it. Prior to that, we're free market, there is actually no free market in a true sense.
right.
These things are regulated by the government. If you actually wanted to have if you are for free market, you wouldn't be for tariffs. Of course, you need to protect your economy. Part of the problem that's plaguing Africa today is the sort of Jamaica thing that happened. When you open up your economy to market forces, then much more advanced economies will take advantage of it. If you have two players in the system, one has a much more established, has more power, has more money, they're going to win in the game. So any smart country is going to put some measures in place to protect their economy. But it's very, very hypocritical to at one hand declare that your country is the country of free markets and capitalism, and then on the other hand be this protectionist. China has no such hypocrisy to face because they haven't told you that they are a free market economy, right? It's the same thing with Elon Musk declaring to be a free speech absolutist, which is nonsense because there has to be some form of content moderation. Yes, you can say, you know what, I want to allow as much free speech as possible, but there are also bounds. But when you set up yourself for failure by saying you're a free speech absolutist, it means that everything is allowed. Nothing should be off bounds. So when he banned the guy that was tracking his private jets using publicly available data, that was against the principle of free speech. The guy wasn't using private data, he was using publicly available data, right? So he should have been able to accept that should be an acceptable risk of free speech. But he did the right thing because that was a security threat to him. So
Right.
don't declare yourself to be for something in theory and then in practice you do something totally different, right? Now to
Right.
the other point about why it might not be so good to be too protectionist is that countries deal on international trade and they trade on their trade-offs. So countries sell their strengths and then they buy their weaknesses.
Right.
America is known for high-end technological products. So that's what its economy is based off of. It's not as big a manufacturing base anymore as China is. China is the number one, US is still the number two, right? So you can't make everything you need domestically. You literally can't make everything you need, right? There are some things you have to import. Even in manufacturing those things, there are some raw materials you need to import. So there has to
Right.
be a balance. You have to maximize your strengths. What areas is the US stronger in? To maximize that and save your energy. You can buy what's not really your strength. That's the way international trade should go. But it seems like MAGA wants to eat their cake and have it, and it frankly doesn't work that way in the real world.
Yeah. The thing I will add is, rightfully so, people were complaining about what NAFTA did to the U.S. economy. So, and I've seen this kind of in person too. We had, I think, at one point we had a vast economy that was very mixed, and now it feels like we are more of a service economy. And we have some manufacturing here. Maybe by our sheer size, I don't know where we rank, whether it's top 10 or top 5 or whatever it is.
Number
But that
two,
could is a number 2.
yeah, after China.
Okay. So, and sometimes we have a size advantage when it comes to different things like that. But one thing I can tell you is that middle America has been decimated by stuff like NAFTA, right? And allowing for jobs to go elsewhere or to save a couple nickels. These are very particular things that people were kind of sold a bill of goods on, that, oh, this is going to be better for you and your job. Oh, okay. And then 6 months later they're given a notice that your job is actually going overseas, or not even overseas, it's going south, it's going to Mexico. The United States used to have a really strong manufacturing base, and now, even right now, it's still fractured when it comes to manufacturing cars, automobiles. Our U.S. automakers are struggling in some senses. I don't know if you've heard, but they're they're almost like consolidating stuff, and they've been closing down plants throughout the Midwest. And what a lot of people don't realize is, especially when it comes to like middle America, when there's one strong economy, right? So let's say General Motors. If General Motors built a plant in somewhere in Ohio, well, people move there. And so people move there and they work at this plant. And then there are businesses that surround it because there's people that are there. So let's have these businesses. So like it just becomes an entire ecosystem. So when that plant shuts down, no one has any money. There aren't as many jobs. People leave and businesses die. And quite literally entire communities disappear because what used to be a strong manufacturing base was now sent elsewhere. And whether you listen to a company and they say we had to do it because of this reason and we were going to go under if we didn't all of a sudden build in China, like I don't believe that for 1 second. So there are definitely questions to be had as far as, do we take American jobs seriously? Do we value what is valuable about America? Are we looking out for blue collar workers and not just white collar workers? Like, I think these are legitimate questions. My problem is that we're engaging in dumb conversations by people who don't know what they're talking about. So in the same way, when I turn on CNN, you got this mousy girl from the Washington Post looking at Kevin O'Leary, who is a multi-millionaire, I don't think he's a billionaire, but multi-millionaire who's made businesses all across the world, who's been in manufacturing. She's looking at him and lecturing him about trade with China. And he's like, little girl, that's all I do is trade with China. I can tell you exactly how they operate. Like, she's the wrong person lecturing this man about what is going on. In the same way, Vivek knows what he is talking about. Elon knows what he's talking about because they actually do it. So when someone who just happens to have 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 followers for being a loudmouth says, no, this is right, this is wrong, it doesn't work, it does work, all because they took 5 minutes and Googled some stuff and came across a couple of links and copied and pasted it. Like, I think that's the problem. The basis of the argument is based off of inexperience, and they have no idea what they're talking about. They don't ask questions. Hey, Vivek, if I was to talk to Vivek, I know what his background is. I would ask him questions. And then if he gives me an answer, then I can ask him and challenge those questions. But they're so certain about something they've never been involved in. It's like they never started a business. They never hired anybody. The business that they have is a sole proprietorship. They work for themselves, and they're the only employee for their LLC company. Like, you're not a business owner. You've never started a company where you had to employ tens of people, nevertheless hundreds or thousands of people. And yet you want to lecture Vivek, who is someone who not only built one successful company, but two successful companies. And Forbes had him as being a billionaire before the age of 30. Like, like the man, I think he knows what he's talking about way more than me and way more than you. So it's stuff like that. And one last thing I'll say, it's like when the left goes after Trump and says, Donald Trump filed for bankruptcy. You know how many successful businessmen file for bankruptcy? Like, they have failed companies and they learn from it and they build multiple successful companies, or just one. All you need is one Google. It doesn't matter that you had 5 bad Googles. You need one Google. And guess what? You got a successful company and you did something worthwhile. So I think there is a severe lack of understanding when it comes to business acumen. The reason I know certain things about business is because I've worked for companies and I've talked to the owners. The last company I worked for, I could go into the CEO's office. I could ask him whatever I want. And he'd tell me what he did and how he made his position, how he thinks. There's lots of wealthy, successful men and women who are like that. But they don't ask questions. They're just certain because they Googled it.
Yeah, so I think this would be a very good place to draw this conversation to a close. Thank you so much, Adam. I know you are friends with Vivek. Maybe some other time I would like to talk to you about Vivek. So, lastly, what do you think this whole rift portends for the Republican Party and the MAGA movement? Who do you see coming out on top in this sort of rift, and how does it resolve? Does this balkanize the MAGA movement and rip this apart for good, or is there something that can be done?
I wish I had a good answer for you. It was something that I was worried about prior to the election win, because I noticed that there is a faction of what I would call like very traditional, especially like Christian conservative right, that seem to be jockeying for position. And I would talk to people behind the scenes too, and they would notice stuff similarly behind the scenes. And what I was surmising is that Donald Trump is not going to be around forever. This is it. He's got 4 years and then he's done. So what's going to happen after the 4 years? And so as much as we had that political shift moving a lot of people either to become independents like myself or to the right, maybe it's in reaction to the cultural shift. But I know certain people do not like the open tent, not the open tent, the big tent Republican Party view. I don't care if you're gay, straight, black, white, immigrant, whatever, come and join us. I know for a fact that there are people who do not like this. Now, whether they're prominent people or not is a different story. But I know that there's a faction of people who do not like this view, who are very overt and do not like gay people, right? And I, as a Christian, I believe we're instructed to hate the sin, but not the sinner. And a lot of people hate both, and that's a different story. But there's a I think that there's an ideological and power shift that's likely going to happen soon, and that worries me. While I am not a Democrat, while I'm not a Republican, I think our country is better when we have two competent factions competing for every American's vote. And right now, the left is ideological and radical. Maybe in some ways they're waking up. In some ways, but right now we're dealing with a mostly radical left wing, especially in prominent positions. What I fear is that we're going to see much of the same coming from the Republican Party, going back to the old ways of saying we only want some of you. And it's just like, well, that's how you ended up with Trump. And actually Trump is the best thing that happened to the Republican Party, and he's not a Republican. And people forget that. But you're going to have a dying off party because Americans wholeheartedly don't like that viewpoint. They don't like the viewpoint that only some Americans matter. They don't.
Yeah. So that would be it for this show. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for those who came around. Anand, Zachariah, Stanley, Free Zone. Like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you guys in another live stream. It's bye for now.